Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Take me through what was a stunning piece of reporting when it came across last night.
So the thrust of the story is that in the President's Daily Brief, which is the most important intelligence product that the U.S. community puts together for the chief executive each and every day, that the coronavirus was being mentioned repeatedly, that it came up at least a dozen times in January and February in various forms. In some cases, it was substantial articles describing the course of the virus, its spread into Europe, the threat it posed politically and economically around the world. In other cases, it was likely just a minor update or a mention because this was something that U.S. spy agencies were tracking very closely across this time.
Greg Miller, there's some terms of art in the reporting, and anyone that sort of followed the Post reporting or the Times reporting after 9/11 might recognize them. This idea of sort of an uptick, the idea that it was in the briefing at the same sorts of levels that an imminent terrorist threat might be at. Can you talk about just how severe this was in terms of the myriad of issues that the intel community briefs any president on?
Yeah, so I think that this increased in intensity over time is our understanding. That early on in January, the reporting was very fragmentary. And it was basically, it looks like something bad is happening in China. We're not quite clear what it is. It looks like a viral outbreak. It looks like China is trying to suppress information about the severity of it. But then in the ensuing weeks, the reporting improves. They start to see more information. Obviously, then they are not the only ones, but they see the spread and the follow-on outbreaks in Italy and in Spain and countries. And it's, I have to emphasize that these reports are just one channel of information that is coming to Trump throughout this period. Of course, he also has entire agencies, cabinet secretaries, and pandemic experts, epidemiologists who also work for the U.S. government, who are also sending alarms with increasing intensity as we get closer and closer to March.
Well, that's a great point. And if you could just marry up the two pieces, because you and your colleagues have done some of that reporting. The Washington Post and the New York Times have also, I think, shared with readers some of the original source emails from the group called Red Dawn. I mean, this is the intel piece of what is a very crystal clear picture of people inside Trump's cabinet knowing full well what was about to come to our shores.
Yeah, I mean, I think that especially as you get deeper into February, and you start to see that evidence that there's no way this has been contained in China, it hasn't been contained in Italy, that it is just spilling across multiple borders. And of course, looking back at this period now, it's critical because it's increasingly obvious that February was a very important month where earlier interventions in the United States And in fact, earlier, just attempts to get mobilized, right, to gather basic protective gear for hospitals and healthcare professionals to make sure that everybody is working hand in glove on the development of a diagnostic test. Trump was asked about what his administration accomplished in the month of February at a recent press conference and really didn't have an answer for that.
Frank Figliuzzi, so much to unpack here in this extraordinary piece of reporting, but I remember hearing from my own former intelligence community sources in sort of around the same time that we were covering impeachment, so in January, February, that what had happened in Wuhan not only could happen here, but would happen here if we didn't take the right steps. And that's obviously unclassified information that was available to anyone reading the Chinese press and European press. I mean, where does the White House think they have any leg to stand on in sort of shrugging their shoulders and saying, who knew? I mean, they knew.
Yeah, the fact that you were hearing from former associates, sources, this same thing, can you imagine the level of detail that was being presented in the president's daily briefing? Look, in my career, I've signed off on those components that came from the FBI that made it to the PDB. It's a big deal. Senior analysts are up all night drafting potential components for the brief. The director of the agency sign off. The DNI signs off. By the time something gets to the president's desk in that PDB, it has been vetted and gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and it is some of the most sensitive information there is. And so some of your viewers might be saying, I don't quite understand the connection between the intelligence agencies and health reporting, but I'm here to tell you that it's some of the strongest, most confirmed information you can get, because it's coming both from electronic sources, from human sources on the ground in other countries who are telling you Chinese officials are very worried about the spread. Here's what we've just intercepted. Here's what the head of their health department is saying. All of that getting presented. And so I don't know what's worse, Nicole, a president of the United States who is ignoring and not even reading his PDB, or one who's reading it and completely ignoring the reporting.
Well, Frank, I mean, let's pull that thread a little bit, because Greg Miller actually reported years ago that the president doesn't read his PDBs, but we know they get read. I mean, Jared Kushner had his father-in-law sort of finagle a security clearance for him so that he could continue to work on Mideast peace or whatever foreign policy assignment he had. We know they get read. I mean, what does it say? To me, it's one of two things. They either read it and didn't believe it, or they read it and lied anyway. And that's the piece of the after-action report, I think, that will paint a lot of people in a very unflattering light.
Right. So when all is said and done, and you made the analogy to 9/11, and boy, I'm having some flashbacks now to 9/11, because if you were in the intel community before 9/11, you knew the chatter was there. Everyone knew the chatter was there among Al-Qaeda. Something big was about to happen. So there's too many people who know about this by the time it gets to the PDB. And when we do an after-action report, these PDBs don't disappear. They exist in multiple places. If I were the House and Senate intelligence committees right now, I'd be issuing a preservation order. I don't want these things destroyed. I want them preserved for future study and research. And we have the acting DNI came out with an official statement that said what? Quote, detail of the article is not true. Details of the article is not true. Well, which details? That it was 12 times in the PDB, or was it 10 times in the PDB? That was a core article, or it was an executive summary? What is it that's wrong? Because it's a no-brainer politically for the president to come out, stop all of this discussion, and say, time out. I'm releasing and declassifying the pertinent parts of these PDBs. Here they are. The Washington Post is wrong. But I don't see that happening. That's the smartest thing they could do right now. And absent that, this distrust of anything coming out of the White House is going to remain.
It is Wednesday, the 29th of April of 2020. And you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Oh no, it's not as aggressive as you think it is. It's merely a lovely egg dish with an equally lovely velvety hollandaise sauce. Oh, please. And it's not slathered, okay? We do the Manhattan style here, so a little bit less. and velvety smooth. Oh my. Well, did you have a good rest? Because it's going to be another busy day, and it's going to be another busy rest of the week, and even more busy weekend, as they all will be until this guy and his entourage, and I don't just mean in the Oval Office with the family that he brung, but I'm talking about all those cabinet secretaries too. And how about that vice president of his? Well, they all need to be removed. I would prefer them in handcuffs, maybe even ankle irons, frog-marched to Leavenworth to serve out their term before being frog-marched to The Hague. But I'm a romantic. We'll probably have this epiphany when we take the Oval Office once again, and that is, well, we gotta look forward, not look backward. You know what? If you don't look about what's gaining on you, you might get choked from behind. And that is what happens every single time. Okay. Well, Trump doesn't know how to time this properly. Normally, they tank the economy right when he's leaving office. Then the Democrat has to start taking care of it. He's done this, quite a while, 6 months ahead of time, a little bit more. Come on, Donnie, I thought you could make the trains run on time, you little. Well, yeah, actually, Mussolini was much shorter than Trump. But Trump does have a Napoleon complex. Yeah, it might be because of his small hands. Well, the country is been pretty much reopened. Has it ever been closed? Because I can tell you something, and it's anecdotal, I know, but tell me if you think it's true. Have you seen it where you live? Can you determine a person's political affiliations by how much care they take for themselves and their neighbors? And that means wearing a mask. Maybe some other behaviors too. Have you noticed that you are pretty darn correct about what political affiliations those people have? And I'm saying those people as a separate group. You might call that a form of bigotry, prejudice, but let me define prejudice. It's when you're prejudging. We are not prejudging here. We are post-judging. And those deplorables are acting and have acted and continue to act in deplorable ways. Who yells at a nurse? Calls her a commie. Go back to China. Do you think that they really care for people in China? Under your construct about what the red Chinese are? Oh, man. I keep thinking of Cat's Cradle. Vonnegut's novel, Cat's Cradle, about the billions and billions of microscopic Chinese coming to invade our country. Like a pandemic. A virus. Yep, Kurt was quite prescient, and he was quite critical, too, of people's behavior. And he pretty much prophesied exactly what a deplorable would do. And they are doing it. Except I don't even think Kurt was aware of the vast numbers of these deplorables who know nothing. Oh, they're good at passing on bad information. Like Bakersfield urgent care doctors who own the urgent care facilities across the Southland, or, out down there in Bakersfield, fudging with statistics because they know. And then you really start breaking the stats down and you realize that they're pretty much having a stat bias. Look, Yeah, they were essentially trying to get an average of how many people don't or do have the virus and how many people have or have not died from the virus. And the statistics they were using was the equivalent of measuring the average height of Americans when the only people that come into your clinic are NBA players. So we'll speak about that, and I'll try to put that together for you to show how those statistics break down. It's, all you need to do is take a freshman college stats course. Jeez. I thought that used to be required. Don't they require that anymore to take a stats course in your first 2 years in college? Boy, they used to back in the day. You had to get that out of the way so maybe it was just in my program. Or programs, because I had a double major. But regardless, it doesn't take much to break down where the confirmation bias is from these two doctors who own a bunch of urgent care facilities across Southern California. And why the right wing would share their misinformation, not only because those doctors are deplorable Trumpers themselves, but the ones who are sharing it are deplorable Trumpers also. And, a third of those toxic types who will never change, they've always been around in our body politic. A toxic third. It used to be that, some of us are old enough to remember when they were afraid to come out of the woodwork. And somehow a black guy got elected, and the next thing you know, they're all around going, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. Yeah, and you're trying to do it. Because I know that they really believe there's a better world somewhere. And I keep saying, look, what if there's not? What if this is it? This is it. We got to do it right here and right now. There's not another chance. A better world somewhere. There's another world, quote, quote, around world, sure. I can accept that better. I don't know. Maybe it's not. Look at the violence and arbitrary BS of the universe, the whole cosmos. It's out to kill you. Jeez. We're lucky. We are lucky. And we're going to just throw it away because there might be a better world somewhere. Yeah, well, I liken it to the folks who moved from the Bay Area up here to Southern Oregon because they didn't like the graffiti on the walls, which is essentially Lee Atwater code for there's a lot of brown and black people down there and we're afraid. And it's apropos that the city, right pretty close to Rogue River, to down I-5 a bit, is called White City. And it's not because somebody there is named White. No, I think it's because of something entirely pigment-oriented, shall we say. Oh, my. Well, that was a bit of a introduction there. The U.S. intelligence had warned Trump over a dozen times in January and February about the pandemic. So, of course, it's going to raise questions of whether Trump believed his intel agencies or he lied to the American people. And I would probably surmise it could be both, knowing this guy. Indeed. Before we get into the rest of the menu, let me just make note of the pie saucer-sized pupils that Trump comes out with, and why isn't anyone asking about the president of the United States coming out high as a kite? And you can tell by his pie plate sized pupils, and he does not have pie plate sized pupils. My God, they're much bigger. Volleyball maybe, okay, but pie saucer, I don't think that's big enough. Those pupils are as big as volleyballs. And something ought to be done about it. And I don't think Walter Reed knows what to do. Trump has talked to Walter Reed, a really great guy, by the way. Well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Nearly 70 aging Massachusetts veterans sickened with coronavirus have died in the deadliest known outbreak at a long-term care facility in the U.S. Oh, my God. The federal government has been sued over its denial of coronavirus relief payments to U.S. citizens married to immigrants. Yeah, that's another story ancillary to that. Trump's out there saying, yeah, we'll give the Democratic blue states their money, but you got to turn over your residents, illegals. We're going to put them to work in the meat packing plants. Arbeit macht frei, mofo. Arbeit macht frei. Work will make you free. FBI documents reveal extensive communication between Roger Stone and Julian Assange about the Russian hacks. You know, the collusion that everybody says Mueller said never occurred, and Mueller said, yeah, it does. I just, these guys have obstructed so much, I can't really pin a crime on them. And since he calls himself the President of the United States, it's up now to Congress to ferret it out and convict this guy and throw him out of office. But his accomplices in the Senate, and most of all, maybe everyone in the GOP is in on it. Are we fucked or are we fucked? They actually had that in the Mueller report. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Prague district mayor is under police protection against one of those convenient Russian assassination threats. Convenient. And the World Health Organization warns the pandemic is far from over, and children from the poorest countries will suffer needlessly. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right-ish of the page is our chat room link. Oh, what a lovely way to engage. And please do. Kelly Lincoln monitors that. And it's right there by the social media scroll. Oh, you can't miss it. Now, if you would take a gander across the page to our Patreon link there at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. If you could please then become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, your recurring contribution, say how about the cost of an espresso-type coffee drink, will sustain us, indeed, because we're able to take those dollars and stretch them beyond compare. And we are able to do that because we're quantum mechanics, and we leave no quark untouched. So if you could please do that, we are able then to match, or actually we have to take a lot more out of our own pockets, but that's a little secret I shouldn't be telling you about. Oops. Anyway, your contributions helps us pay these bills, which seem to go up even during a pandemic. How dare they? How dare they? Anyway, if we pay our bills, we're able to just fly under the radar and be the resistance radio the founders originally intended for us so many eons ago. Yes, and we've been doing this for almost 10 years. I'm going to keep crowing about that. I just think that's something. It's been quite quick when one thinks about it, or if they don't. Anyway, thank you for your generosity, and also thank you again to those who upped their recurring contribution, their recurring monthly contribution. What a surprise. And that generosity does warm our hearts. And thank you. Wow. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. And thank you, Tom. I will, of course, always take care of at Justice Putnam. Unless I can convince one of my grandkids to do it, but they're too busy doing their own thing, and good for them. Anyway, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's about 10 minutes before showtime, and then post that up on social media for people's social media pleasure. Oh, wow. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay. Boy, we curate a show here, but there is so much more out there in the world and stuff that actually comes in on the transom, and I have to once again remind myself and folks out there, I have to put myself in a bubble. I can't take in anymore. I could riff on it just as it comes in, but that'd be a completely different format. Maybe we'll try that someday. Anyway, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of our curated show, and this is a salon, is out of the Associated Press by Alana Durkin-Riecher. Nearly 70 residents sickened with coronavirus have died at a Massachusetts home for aging veterans, as state and federal officials try to figure out what went wrong in the deadliest known outbreak at a long-term care facility in the United States. While the death toll at the state-run Holyoke Soldiers' Home continues to climb, federal officials are investigating whether residents were denied proper medical care, and the state's top prosecutor is deciding whether to bring legal action. It's horrific, said Edward Lapointe, whose father-in-law lives at the home and had a mild case of the virus. He continued and summed up with, "These guys never had a chance." 68 veteran residents who tested positive for the virus have died, and it's not known whether another person who died had COVID-19. Another 82 residents and 81 employees have tested positive. The home superintendent, who's been placed on administrative leave, has defended his response and accused state officials of falsely claiming they were unaware of the scope of the problem there. The superintendent, Bennett Walsh, said earlier this month state officials knew that his home was in crisis mode when it came to staffing shortages and were notified early and often about the contagion at the facility. Staffing problems that plagued the home for years contributed to the virus spreading like wildfire, said Joan Miller, a nurse at the home. Because staffing was so tight, workers from one unit were constantly moving to other units to help out and bringing their germs with them, she said. At one point, a unit was shut down because there was not enough staff to operate it, and those veterans were moved into close quarters in other parts of the building, she said. Veterans were on top of each other. We didn't know who was positive and who was negative, and then they grouped people together, and that really exacerbated it even more, said Miller, who spoke through a mask during a break from her job at the facility. She's still working there. And we're going to yell at nurses. Go back to China. That's when it really blew up, she said. The situation is now somewhat contained because there are so few veterans living there, Miller said. There were nearly 230 residents living at the home in late March, and only about 100 remained on Monday, the Boston Globe reported. Galvin, also of the Associated Press, brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these priests? The Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund has sued the federal government over its denial of coronavirus relief payments to U.S. citizens who are married to immigrants without Social Security numbers. The lawsuit was filed in Maryland on behalf of 6 American citizens who were denied coronavirus relief checks because they filed and paid taxes with a spouse who has what's known as an individual taxpayer identification number, or a way for immigrants without legal status to still pay federal taxes, which millions do. MALDEF says the Treasury Department is violating Americans' First and Fifth Amendments by denying them payments simply because of who they are married to. Congress last month passed a $2.2 trillion package to help businesses, workers, and a healthcare system staggered by coronavirus. Many Americans had their share deposited into their accounts in the last couple of weeks. It's estimated that 2 million U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents are married to people without Social Security numbers, although it's unclear how many of them file jointly with them. All of the families are very much like other families in the U.S. They have children at home, they are facing contraction of the economy, and they still have to pay their rent, buy groceries, and buy gas, said Nina Perales, MALDEF's Vice President of Litigation. Christina Segundo Hernandez, who lives in Fort Worth, Texas, is one of the plaintiffs. Segundo Hernandez is a U.S. citizen married to a Mexican immigrant who pays federal taxes through his ID number. The couple, married 8 years, file jointly each year. They're both working fewer hours because of the coronavirus pandemic, and they've fallen behind on their bills. Getting a coronavirus relief check would have helped. It would have been able to fill up my refrigerator for my kids, she said, and she has 4 children. I think it needs to be known that there are people out there that are doctors and things like that who are putting their lives at risk going through the same thing. They are being betrayed by their government because of who they are married to. And she's right, because Santa Monica Goebbels Stephen Miller thinks it's a good idea. Now, this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy by Eric Tucker, Colleen Long, and Michael Balsamo of the Associated Press really proves that this virus has been with us for a lot longer than we've really, believed. A lot longer. Now, there's been a lot of reportage that, people, knew that the virus was here maybe even in December. Others were aware of it in November. This article, this FBI report or document dump really reveals it's been with us for a lot longer. Weeks after Robert Mueller was appointed special counsel in the Russia investigation, Roger Stone, you know him, a confidant of Donald Trump, reassured WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange that if prosecutors came after him, I will bring down the entire house of cards, according to FBI documents made public yesterday, Tuesday. The records reveal The extent of communications between Stone and Assange, whose anti-secrecy website published Democratic emails hacked by the Russians during the 2016 presidential election, and underscores efforts by Trump allies to gain insight about how release of information they expected would embarrass Hillary Clinton. The documents, FBI affidavits submitted to obtain search warrants in the criminal investigation into Stone, were released following a court case brought by the Associated Press and other media organizations. They were made public as Stone, convicted last year in Mueller's investigation into ties between Russia and the Trump campaign, awaits a date to surrender to a federal prison system that has grappled with outbreaks of coronavirus. In a June 2017 direct message on Twitter cited in the records, Stone reassured Assange that the issue was still nonsense and said, "As a journalist, it doesn't matter where you get information, only that it is accurate and authentic." And he cited as an example the 1971 Supreme Court ruling that facilitated the publishing by newspapers of the Pentagon Papers, classified government documents about the Vietnam War. Oh, horrors. Stone, this is the one thing about the right wing and the Republicans. They're always appropriating our stuff. According to the FBI documents, Assange, who is imprisoned in London and is fighting his extradition to the U.S., responded to Stone's 2017 Twitter message by saying, "Between CIA and DOJ, they're doing quite a lot. On the DOJ side, that's coming most strongly from those obsessed with taking down Trump, trying to squeeze us into a deal." Stone replied that he was doing everything possible to address the issues at the highest level of government. The records illustrate the Trump campaign's curiosity about what information WikiLeaks was going to make public. Former White House advisor Steve Bannon told Mueller's team under questioning that he had asked Stone about WikiLeaks because he had heard Stone had a channel to Assange, and he was hoping for more releases of damaging information. Mueller's investigation identified significant contact during the 2016 campaign between Trump associates and Russians, but did not allege a criminal conspiracy to tip the outcome of the presidential election because they obstructed so much. No, you don't get to interview anybody, and we're not giving you any documents. Badges? You got a badge? We don't need your stinking badges. All right, let's get to our break. And when we come back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world and finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, It Only Looks Like Eden. The English-language debut from Polish director Małgorzata Szumowska is an entry into the burgeoning category of psychological horror. Add to the recent Midsummer and Gretel and Hansel, we now have The Other Lamb, an allegorical tale of religious oppression and its fellow traveler male domination. As the movie begins, we meet a strange religious cult led by the Shepherd, perfectly cast in the person of Game of Thrones' Mikhail Hausman. He's a self-styled messiah with the look of a dime store Jesus portrait. His flock is curiously composed of only females who are divided between wives and sisters, distinguished by their color-coded garments. The wives wear red and the sisters blue, but it becomes clear that this distinction isn't sufficient to channel the shepherd's interests. Among the sisters, his favorite is young Sella, played by Raffi Cassidy from Vox Lux. She's just coming of age and has known no other life, but becomes our heroine here as the flock is forced to move from their existing compound to a new home deeper in the woods. It's her intuition, her interactions with an estranged wife, and her hallucinatory visions filled with menstrual imagery and snapshots of an alternate life that show her the way out and bring us to a conclusion foreshadowed in an early scene of a mauled lamb. Sumoska and cinematographer Michael Englert capture a look which is intimate, stark, and sumptuously dark, with lots of through shots and use of depth of field, a face through burning candles, a landscape through wet branches. While gorgeous and disturbing at a lean 97 minutes, The Other Lamb wouldn't have suffered for more attention to the inner workings of the cult or more scenes exploring Sella's betrayal. Still, it's a stunning achievement in creepy. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
At an alarming rate, a new death penalty is being carried out in prisons and jails in the United States. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. More than 100 inmates have died recently from COVID-19 in America's prisons and jails, a number that in all likelihood is about to skyrocket. An ACLU report indicates that COVID-19 deaths in prisons and jails could well double the total number of deaths from the virus in the United States. Because in prison, where social distancing is impossible, COVID-19 spreads like wildfire. The solution? The number of people who are locked up needs to be dramatically reduced. And it can be. A 2016 study from the Brennan Center for Justice found there was no compelling public safety reason to incarcerate 576,000 of the people locked up in federal and state prisons. For example, elderly people, when released from prison, have an extraordinarily low rate of recidivism for any crime. And in federal prison today, there are more than 10,000 inmates, 60 or older, most of whom have been locked up for a really long time. Those people were not sentenced to death for their crimes. Many can and should be released before COVID-19 kills them. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1899. That was the day that Idaho miners detonated 50 cases of dynamite at the Bunker Hill and Sullivan mine in Wardner. For nearly a decade, Idaho miners and owners had been locked in a bitter battle in the Coeur d'Alene district. The mining companies fought against unionization. They hired Pinkerton detectives to infiltrate union meetings and fire those who dared to hold a union card. In 1893, the Western Federation of Miners was founded and became a major organizing union in the region. Bunker Hill remained non-union, drawing the ire of workers in the surrounding mines. A group of miners took over a train and loaded it with dynamite. The Western Federation of Miners paper, the Idaho State Tribune, described what happened next, writing, quote, "A detachment of Union miners armed with Winchester rifles was dispatched to the mountainside beyond the mill, and the work of placing under the mill the 3,000 pounds of dynamite taken from the magazine of the Frisco mine at Gem was commenced." At no time did the demonstration assume the appearance or the attitude of a disorganized mob. All of the details were managed with the discipline and precision of a perfectly trained military organization. The response was swift and brutal. Federal troops were called in. Along with gun-toting thugs hired by the company, they arrested every man they could find, not just miners. Even a doctor and a postmaster were swept up in the arrests. More than 1,000 men were arrested. They were held in a makeshift bullpen made from a converted barn. Some were held as long as a year without any formal charges filed until the unionization effort was crushed. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
I read the news today, oh boy.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Yesterday, we told you that the U.S. had reached the grim milestone of 1 million confirmed COVID-19 cases. Yes, the country, with about 4% of the global population, has reported 1/3 of the world's coronavirus infections. Today, we have another terrible number to pass along. According to Johns Hopkins University, the number of people in America who've died from the virus has now passed 57,000. That is the American death toll in the Vietnam War. As of Wednesday morning, the U.S. has 1,019,170 confirmed cases and 58,611 deaths. And despite Donald Trump's frequent claims that he created the best economy in the world's history, we had been riding the longest ever economic expansion. It followed the Great Recession, an 11-year growth trend that started under the Obama administration has now ended. On Wednesday morning, the Commerce Department released its report on the gross domestic product. The U.S. economy shrank by 4.8% in the first quarter, the biggest decline since the Great Recession. After saying they will join the Senate and return to D.C. and reconvene on Monday, May 4th, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer on Tuesday announced that after consulting the Capitol physician, who said there was a risk to members that he wouldn't recommend taking, they reversed their decision and will not return next week. By the way, the Capitol physician advises both chambers of Congress. The Republican-led Senate has chosen to ignore those recommendations. When Donald Trump promised, "Your head will spin," perhaps this is what he was talking about. Just last week, Trump criticized Georgia's Governor Kemp for starting to open his state too soon. But on Tuesday, he cheered Texas for doing the same. Despite the fact that many places haven't yet reached their peak infection, they're still beginning the process of reopening their states. But experts are warning of a coming second wave. Dr. Anthony Fauci on CNN Tuesday said the U.S. could be in for a bad fall and a bad winter if countermeasures like testing and social distancing aren't implemented in time. If a second wave coincides with the flu season, it could be even worse. Around the world, some countries mark optimistic new milestones, while others are still struggling. China announced it will hold its annual parliamentary meeting in May after a 2-month delay. But Britain's Office of National Statistics revealed the death toll in England and Wales was up to 54% higher through mid-April than previously reported. Canada, meanwhile, is seeing deaths spike, even though the disease has spread slowly in that country. And in Lebanon, violent protests are breaking out due to increased hunger and poverty in the wake of the pandemic. Here at home, the Vice President of the United States toured the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota on Tuesday, but video of his visit prompted mass criticism as we see that Mike Pence chose not to wear a face mask. The renowned medical center's policy requires masks for all doctors, nurses, patients, and visitors, but Mike Pence refused. He was asked why by CNN.
Can you just walk us through why you made a decision not to wear the mask, even though the clinic said that they tweeted that they had asked you to do so?
Well, let me say, as Vice President of the United States, I'm tested for the coronavirus on a regular basis, and everyone who is around me is tested for the coronavirus. And when the CDC issued guidelines about wearing a mask, it was their recognition that people that may have the coronavirus could prevent the possibility of conveying the virus to someone else by wearing a mask. And since I don't have the coronavirus, I thought it'd be a good opportunity for me to be here, to be able to speak to these researchers, these incredible healthcare personnel, and look them in the eye and say thank you.
Last time I checked, the mask doesn't cover your eyes. He could still look them in the eye while wearing a mask. Just saying. Sickening. Literally. In more literally sickening news, unions in the U.S. meatpacking industry say Donald Trump is jeopardizing lives and prioritizing cold cuts over workers' health. Trump invoked the Defense Production Act to force meat processing plants operated by Tyson Foods and other major suppliers to stay open, even as the coronavirus spreads among workers. The president's executive order hands oversight powers to the Department of Agriculture, quote, to determine the proper nationwide priorities and allocation of all the materials, services, and facilities necessary to ensure the continued supply of meat and poultry. Oy. Congressman Justin Amash, who left the Republican Party last year, is now seeking the Libertarian Party nomination for president. And regarding that 2020 election, more than half of Americans now support conducting all U.S. elections by mail, this according to a new Pew poll. That's an important majority to consider as we move closer to the November presidential election, with no guarantee the pandemic will be cleared up by then. Now, if you're wondering how that second round of PPP funding is going, The Hill reports it's been, quote, misstep after misstep, including technical glitches that locked out thousands of applications through banks. The overwhelmed system forced business owners to seek other ways to try to secure federal funds. The Small Business Administration has also infuriated lenders after changing guidance as the program's application process ramped up and was replenished with $320 billion. They said the program could be exhausted of funds as soon as next week. And the story that's been around for years is now gaining traction. The front page of Wednesday's Washington Post has a 3-byline story titled, Calls Grow for Biden to Address Allegation. The story notes that the campaign has forcefully denied Tara Reade's claims of sexual assault, but that Joe Biden has not addressed the accusations and has declined the Washington Post's request for an interview. The story's not going away. Stay tuned.
I got good news.
And that's just a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com. Please click on that donate button.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 57 degrees Fahrenheit. We are expected to be a tad cooler than yesterday, only about 78 or so, maybe 80. A little cooler. We are expecting some rain later on tonight. Cloudy skies early today, followed by partial clearing. Winds are going to be out of the west at a pretty stiff 10 to 15 miles per hour. Partly cloudy skies this evening with a few showers developing late, lows near 50, and winds will continue out. Well, actually will continue out of the west, but at only 5 to 10 miles per hour. And it looks like this bit of dropping overnight, we're expected to have a bit more than 1/10 of an inch of rain. We'll take it. We'll take it. Looks like the weekend is forecast for Saturday and Sunday to have 1/3 to 1/2 inch of rain, and we'll take that too. Let's see here. Confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in Southern Oregon remains confirmed at 49. And thankfully, no one has deceased from the virus here in Jackson County. Grass pollen is just ticked up into the very high range. The air quality index for the region is good at 26 parts per million. And the daytime UV index remains high at 7. Barometric pressure is falling at 29.99 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles. And relative humidity is at 82%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 53 and cloudy with a very chagrined Prime Minister saying we shouldn't be opening this government and economy anytime too soon. Paris is 58 and cloudy with another spike in coronavirus. Rome is 68 and partly cloudy with a spike in coronavirus. Kyiv is 74 and fair with, they're still having quite a few dying every day from coronavirus. Kabul is 59 and mostly cloudy, and they have mostly coronavirus too. Hong Kong is 70 degrees and fair, and people continue to die from coronavirus. But hey, when you're in Hong Kong, you got to mingle. Tokyo is 60 degrees and clear, and they're locking down even tighter because of coronavirus. Sydney, Australia is 66 and partly cloudy, and their prime minister says, hey, we're not going to target any particular country, China, when we investigate about this pandemic that started in China. San Francisco, California is 51 and cloudy with coronavirus, and New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit, cloudy with continuing coronavirus. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Robert Mueller. No, not that Robert Mueller. Another Robert Mueller, who happens to be working at Reuters, brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The mayor of one of the Czech capital's districts said he had been put under police protection due to a threat that a Russian man had been sent to kill him, escalating a row between Prague and Moscow. Mayor Ondrej Kolar of Prague 6 irked Russia in recent months after his district removed a statue of Soviet World War II Commander Marshal Ivan Konev from a square. That prompted criminal investigations by Russian authorities who saw it as an insult. Prague said such investigations of elected representatives was unacceptable.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Anonymous worker bees at Reuters bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The coronavirus pandemic is far from over and is still disrupting normal health services, especially life-saving immunization for children in the poorest countries, the head of the World Health Organization said. The UN agency is concerned about a rising number of cases and deaths in Africa, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and some Asian countries, even as the numbers flatten. or decline in some of the wealthier nations. We have a long road ahead of us and a lot of work to do, the World Health Organization director said, adding that a second wave of infections could be prevented with the right actions. The novel coronavirus, which emerged late last year in the central Chinese city of Wuhan, has already infected almost 3 million and claimed almost 207,000 lives. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. But you do know Netroots Radio will broadcast on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, number 2.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.